Hello everyone and welcome back to another exciting online talk from the Oxford Guild with our Collegium Global Network and our partner societies from leading universities. We're delighted to be hosting this special online discussion today with Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, who is a renowned philanthropist and businesswoman and a medical doctor by training. She co-founded the Motsepe Foundation with her husband, Dr. Patrice Motsepe, in 1999, with the aim of uplifting and empowering the poor and marginalized communities in South Africa, Africa, and the wider world. And in 2013, they became the first family in Africa to sign the Giving Pledge, committing over half their wealth to charity. The Motsepe Foundation has received great commendation for its work in positively impacting the lives of over 500,000 people through a variety of programs, notably its Center for Gender Equality and Leadership. In her role as a social entrepreneur, she's also established African Fashion International, AFI, a leading marketing and development platform for African creatives. AFI supports the growth of the fashion industry on the continent by investing in the success of designers who directly create jobs in a supply chain that is driven by the economic empowerment of women. She's also Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Africa's leading university. Thank you very much again, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, for joining us today and for taking the time to share your insights. Let's start off our discussion by talking about your foundation. Please could you tell us a bit more about the Motsepe Family Foundation and your commitment to the Giving Pledge?
Well, Abbas, thank you very much. Let me first say what an honor it is to be invited by the Oxford Guild to be part of this webinar. I'm delighted also to know that amongst many of your audience, as well as the community, are students who come from the African continent where I am currently in Johannesburg, South Africa. I want the students to know how proud we are that they've worked hard and they have been accepted to a prestigious institution such as Oxford. And we're very, very, very proud of them. I'm also wanting to say that we look forward to all the students and their colleagues coming back to Africa. Africa is an exciting place to be. There are so many opportunities waiting for you here. We hope that they are utilizing the time at Oxford to engage in robust debates, to teach Europe and the UK about Africa, African knowledge, and that they will be coming back to Africa to help us as we rebuild the continent, particularly for the young people, hundreds and hundreds of young people on the continent. And, you know, we need to make sure that there's a better future for them. But to come back to your question about the foundation and the Giving Pledge, I studied in Johannesburg at Wits University. I studied medicine. I grew up in the township of Soweto, where Mr. Mandela also lived in Orlando. I must say that I'm able to sit here and engage with you because of my education, which was made possible by my parents, by my community, the teachers, many people that have enabled me access to good quality education. So when I finished my studies, myself and my husband, Patrice, we met at university. We decided we wanted to give back to our community. And we started our foundation. And our focus at that time was on helping with access to good education for particularly poor students who came from poor families. We focused on education and we also focused on sports. And this was as a response to the challenges that we saw young people having to encounter, problems of substance abuse, problems of teenage pregnancy. And we decided then that would be our focus. And I'll tell you an example of one of the students that we picked up, a young girl by the name of Lindy. She came from KwaZulu-Natal. Lindy fell pregnant after matric, and she's a very bright young girl. She fell pregnant. We found her. We gave her a bursary to go and study at University of Cape Town, one of the best, the leading university on the continent. She finished the studies, We then found a job for her with some of the companies that are associated with the Motsepe Foundation, some of the family companies, and she started working there. What Lindy has been able to do was to grow a small economy around herself. Her mom, who is hypertensive, has been able to now consult with a private doctor. She uses the private medical system. Her daughter goes to an early childhood development center, which she pays for, and a very good one for that matter. Lindy herself has become such a role model in her community. She often goes back to her school, goes to her community, mentors young people, and it's been really exciting to see how she has grown. We then, I think in 2013, we decided to join the Giving Pledge, which is a group of families globally that engage in philanthropy. And at that time, strategic philanthropy, I think, was gaining momentum. And we also decided that we wanted to be more strategic about our giving. We aligned our philanthropy with the Sustainable Development Goals because we noticed that there is so much interlinkages between poverty, unemployment, gender equality. All these SDGs, Sustainable Development issues were interlinked. And the foundation has ended up actually engaging in 12 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Our work, although we are based in Johannesburg, in South Africa, working on the ground with communities, I mean, it's very exciting for us because we're able to do road shows, visit various provinces, meet with recipients of our bursaries or of our giving, and actually find out from them how they think we can best assist with their needs. So we're very engaged on the ground with the communities in development. We also work on the continent, particularly around issues of pandemic response. And then globally, we have partnerships, as we were speaking earlier about partnerships with organizations such as the Milken Institute, where we have prostate cancer research, work that we do with them. We have partnerships with the World Economic Forum, where we promote social entrepreneurship. We have partnerships with many other organizations globally that we work with. So that is the work that the foundation is involved with.
Fantastic. And how do you see philanthropy and development initiatives in Africa evolving as a result of the current COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, coronavirus has really been an eye-opener, and I dare not say an eye-opener because we've known about issues of inequality within our society. It has merely just shown a light on the inequality that exists in communities and in our society. For example, when you and I talk about following protocols of hand washing, of social distancing, we can do that because we have space, we have running water, we have electricity. But for some of these communities, it's not easy to do social distancing because you have 6-10 people staying in a very small a house, and for a lot of the communities there is no running water to speak of. So when we tell them to wash their hands frequently, it becomes a big problem. So COVID has actually shown us how we have not really addressed the issues of development as we should. What the foundation has done, our family foundation, we have made commitments. Our commitment at the beginning of February or March of $60 million was towards responding to the needs for PPEs in South Africa, as well as some of the funds being committed to helping with the African Union, as well as the Centers for Disease Control, we have also partnered with other philanthropists on the continent to respond. Previously, we've worked together in responding to the Ebola crisis. Also to when we had Cyclone Idai happening, we also collaborated. And now we're looking at partnerships between philanthropists, government, as well as private sector. It's been just incredible to see how all these institutions have come together to try and address the pandemic. I think South Africa, as you might be aware, is the hardest hit country on the continent. We're currently sitting at more than 100,000 people that have tested positive for coronavirus. Our challenge is going to be, and as the challenge for most parts of the continent, that our primary care facilities have been lacking, have been a bit deficient. Our ability then to look after all the patients, all the cases that come up in terms of testing them, ensuring that we trace all the contacts becomes very important. And this is where our work with government as well as the healthcare workers in the community that we've been working with previously have become important. But having said that, again, we mustn't forget the issue of development, which is really critically important on the continent for philanthropists.
Fantastic. And we understand last week that South Africa had its commemoration of National Youth Day. What's the significance of it, and what can we learn from South Africa overcoming apartheid as we see the global protests around the world ignite following the Black Lives Matter movement?
So the June 16, 1976 protest march by students was started because of the frustration that students felt with the system that sought to force them to learn in a language that they couldn't understand, or a language that the teachers could teach them in. But I think that was just a culmination of the frustrations that had been there even from before. Issues around this, the apartheid system, which they saw criminalizing their parents, not enabling them to go to school so they can then have better employment opportunities. It was a protest against a system that they felt was unjust and would trap them in perpetual poverty. What we have learned from the protest march of 1976 and comparing that to what's happening now globally is that racism and systemic racism in any form is unacceptable and should be addressed wherever it exists. As a result of the student protest, a lot of the political parties that had been operating underground also became, very active. This culminated, as you would know, with later on with the release of political parties and with South Africa getting into the democratic process when we in '94 then reached our democracy. But the beginning of democracy itself was not the end of the fight against racism. We still experience a lot of racism in South Africa, institutional. It was the beginning of a forum that enabled those who were previously oppressed and those that were perpetuating this evil system of apartheid to come together around the table and to talk about issues that we have, I mean, from, colonialism, apartheid system, it was really a deep-rooted system that required, serious talk around the table. So, and you would know that this was led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and this was followed by, as you would know, those who were wronged receiving apology, as well as there were some reparation. And out of that, there were policies that came out. For instance, we had our BEE policy, that is the Black Economic Empowerment Policy, which was meant to help with a redress of those who were wronged, to enable, for instance, Black businesses which could not operate as well as they could back then during the apartheid system, to give them an opportunity to rise and operate on a level playing field. We still have problems. It's a process of us building our nation, building the rainbow nation that we seek. So I would say to the Black Lives Matters movement that it is important to have. It's actually amazing how we have reached this point, but it is important that there is an opportunity to sit around the table, to acknowledge, firstly, the wrongs that have happened, to seek each other, to find each other, and also to understand how, the other side feels, and what can be done to correct those wrongs. And this is where it comes to issues of talking about symbols, talking about, policies that could assist in bridging that gap. So I think although there are differences between the two movements, there's also a lot of similarities.
Absolutely. As founder of African Fashion International, what role do you see fashion playing in Africa's development, and what does the future of African fashion entail?
So we started African Fashion International back in 2007. As you said, I started as a medical doctor. I'm very passionate about women's health, and I moved into this space because I wanted, firstly, to explore my other talents, but secondly, I saw the clothing and fashion industry as a sector that could contribute towards development on the continent, job creation, very importantly. So we went into the fashion industry with that mindset of contributing towards development. Globally, the fashion industry employs, around 300 million people. It is an industry that is worth about $2.5 trillion. In South Africa, it is being rendered smaller because of the cheap imports. So over the last 10 years, I think our industry was decimated because of cheap imports. And that's why we sought to try and build the industry. The beauty with the continent and is that we can deal with the industry differently. We are able to join the designers with the people that work on their clothes, with the people that actually produce their clothes. So what I'm trying to say is we are able to link all the value chain, the whole value chain, from agriculture, which many countries on the continent export cotton, grow cotton. We have in, for instance, Cape Town, the Eastern Cape, which is an area that breeds a lot of good sheep for wool. And we then can go into the textile industry, develop the textile industry. We can then move into manufacturing using the textiles that are locally produced. And then, of course, move into the design sector, which the fashion designers are involved with, and then it's the retail sector. So we're able to actually link all that value chain, and we know that a lot of people that work along the value chain are women, and a lot of women in South Africa and elsewhere also on the continent are usually breadwinners in their families, supporting their children, their extended families. And having jobs that good in the industry that pay them well, they're able then to support their families with good health, education. They can sustain themselves, and then also, the fashion industry is not just about there is the economic side, but there's also the cultural side of the industry. And we had seen an opportunity for African fashion to bring its voice to the global fashion space. We work a lot with artisans, small, producers who make their clothes by hand. I mean, a lot of the beads that we have, or the knitting itself, is made by women who are at home looking after their children, and still are able to make an income. So where we're going with the fashion industry on the continent is two areas. Firstly, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that we connect the value chain. We also want to make sure that our production, manufacturing, consumption, and how we dispose of clothes that we no longer use is done in a sustainable manner. For instance, in many of our marketing platforms, for instance, the fashion weeks that we host, we use LED lights, ensuring that we are energy friendly. We encourage recycling. We also repurpose some of the clothes that are discarded. And, we work with a lot of local NGOs that provide jobs through the recycling, repurposing of clothing, and ensuring that a lot of the women in the community have jobs. So environmental sustainability is very important. Financial sustainability is important for us. And we also want to make sure that we teach our designers about the importance of looking after the people that work within the industry, that they pay them well, that they are, the environments in which they work is healthy, and that they support them. So all these issues are very important for us.
Definitely. Well, we've got a lot of questions coming from the audience, so let's move on to that. The first one is from Daniel, who studies economics at Oxford, and he's asking, what are the main barriers to development that you see in sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, before COVID, now COVID is our biggest challenge. The issue of infrastructure on the continent is very, very important. And whether it's roads or, electricity, power, or even now what we're seeing with our students going back to universities and having to go online to learn from their homes, the issue of infrastructure for internet use has become critically important. So I think infrastructure is a very, very big one. Education is very important. As you know, the continent is very youthful. We have a lot of young people. It is an opportunity for us to ensure that they have good quality education. At the foundation, for instance, we emphasize STEM studies for our bursary recipients, because we have been seeing opportunities in matching our graduates with sectors in the economy that are actively employing in engineering, the sciences, and agriculture, which is also very important for the continent. Education is very important. I think health, COVID has shown us the importance of health. We have been very fortunate on the continent in that the uptake for immunization in general has been good. The Gates Foundation has done a brilliant work in terms of the Global Alliance for Vaccine Development and ensuring that vaccines are available on the continent as well. Now, the critical thing is going to be with the COVID-19 vaccine development, places, developing areas like the continent, will we have access to those vaccines? And that's critically important. And that's why collaboration is important in this respect. Infrastructure, education, health are very important. And I want to highlight that it was interesting to note that one of the vaccine trials that is being done with Oxford University and one of our local universities, my former university, VETS actually. So it is exciting to see that there are those trials happening. The collaboration is there. Yes, I think those are the main challenges amongst others.
Fantastic. And picking up on your point about STEM subjects, Omari, who studies natural sciences at Cambridge, asks, I've seen that your charity does a lot of work to get women into STEM subjects. How easy have you found it to convince girls that STEM is for them?
Initially we started giving bursaries and encouraging people, matric students to apply for bursaries in STEM. And we realized the uptake was not as good as, it was less than 50% of our students would study STEM, that is girls. We then decided to go to even, higher to secondary schools and primary schools, find these young girls, take them out to science fairs, have people that are already in the engineering fields or in maths come and talk to them about how they're experiencing their work. So it's been, through the support, firstly, of the students in primary school and secondary school, supporting them with the subjects, the STEM subjects, as well as supporting their teachers with STEM subjects, and then role modeling, helping them to see what they could be, if they followed these STEM subjects. I'm finding that a lot of young girls are now very excited. We've got a project called Girls in STEM, and we do amazing things. To excite them about STEM subjects.
Fantastic. And a question here from Matt doing law at Oxford. He asks, as UCT's Chancellor, you're at a unique vantage point when looking at African education. What steps do you think need to be taken in order for Africa to move forward in this regard?
That's a very interesting question that we've been dealing with. So, firstly, the issue of access is still very, very important. A lot of our students are still not able to access university studies because of the cost. So, foundations like ours and other foundations work together to try and fund as many students as possible to ensure that they can get into good universities like UCT, and we work with other chancellors to try and see how we can create funding for these students, working together with government. Secondly, then it is supporting these students. Most of them come from really disadvantaged backgrounds. They've never been to Johannesburg. They come from rural areas. So there are a lot of socio-economic challenges that face them when they come firstly to town and then have to deal with centers of higher education, they are not used to being in, university campuses. So as a foundation, we have created a lot of collaboration with students who are in third year to, help students that are coming on, guide them and so forth. So that is the access, and then mentorship. And then now the biggest challenge, as I said, has been that we still have issues of access because of the digital divide. When we went into lockdown, our Vice Chancellor at UCT, Professor Mamokgethi, called me totally in panic. She had to take students and put them in buses, take them home because the university was going to shut down. Obviously, we were not prepared for this. No university was prepared for this. And it meant that we had to now catch up with how we're going to help support these students who are now at home in rural villages to connect with the university and go online. Silver lining on this cloud is that we actually didn't realize how universities could be centers of distribution of technology. We've been talking about bridging the digital divide, and in this instance, ourselves as a foundation, together with universities, came together, and of course other entities, including government, we came together, had to buy laptops for these students, and had to negotiate with telecom companies to make data available to these students because they couldn't afford it. So all of a sudden now, the distribution of technology and the bridging of the digital divide was actually being fast-tracked and was happening, without us having planned for it. And that was really difficult, but I'm glad that we've been able to assist.
Excellent. Here's a question relating to a point you mentioned earlier about the Rainbow Nation and coined by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So Darius, who reads economics at Warwick, asks, how hopeful do you think that the supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, UK, globally, ought to be about healing race relations, given South Africa's experience with this?
As I said, the healing process takes long. It's not, it doesn't happen immediately once there has been talk around the table and acknowledgement. Those need to happen. There needs to be an acknowledgement. There needs to be atonement. There needs to be a reckoning of how certain members of society, particularly when you're talking in a democracy where the rights of everybody are equal, before the law. We're talking about, human rights and equality. We need to realize that we might have wronged certain members of our society. So that needs to happen. And then it's a process, and it's a long process. You go forward 2 steps and then you go backwards. The important thing is that building institutions, like policies, having laws to ensure that should these laws, for instance, of if racism rears its head, it is attended to immediately. It is also important that for me, I always take lessons from somebody like Madiba, who, Nelson Mandela was truly an amazing leader for South Africa, who could walk out of prison and realize that for him to move forward, he had to really forgive his captors. So yes, I think there is hope, but there's also a need for acknowledgement of the wrongs, for corrections of what had gone wrong, and for people to look around us. The symbols, are these symbols representative of our society? Do we have diversity in our institutions? Are we making it possible for minority groups or those that are previously disadvantaged to participate in our democracy, you know, and identify those things that hold them back, and really move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and a spirit of wanting to build one nation. We've got to make opportunities available to everybody. We do realize that you know, you cannot have equality in total, but you have to have equal access to opportunities.
Absolutely. We've got a question here from Liv, reading geography at Oxford, who asks, what are your thoughts about the way in which Western countries have provided aid to African nations? Do you feel it has been too carefree and therefore too open to abuse?
You know, having been a member of the Giving Pledge and interacting with donors from the West, philanthropists, big philanthropists from the West, what I've noticed is that when you are far away from the work that you're doing and you don't really have a connection, as in visiting the projects, knowing the people, and actually having an attitude of wanting to learn more from them as to how you can assist them, you know, then you're going to run into problems. It is important also that, you know, that we ensure that there is proper governance, that we root out corruption, which happens even in philanthropy, unfortunately, where the aid that is supposed to reach people doesn't reach them because we have not put systems, the right systems in place. So I think being involved with your philanthropy, understanding the needs of the society you're trying to help, and actually inviting them to tell you how you can assist them, being humble enough to understand that they know more about their problems, and there are often local solutions that you may not be aware of. I think if you don't allow yourself to learn in that manner, then you may run into problems.
And moving on to the Cecil Rhodes issue, Matthias, who studies economics and management at Oxford, asks, currently Oxford is gripped by a debate about Cecil Rhodes. How important do you think it is for countries like the UK and South Africa to address issues like this in their past?
Again, I think if you don't deal with issues in an open and honest manner where you engage with each other, it will just be there, you know, unless you, and I'm a doctor, I'm going to use the analogy of pus. If you're not going to cut, you know, the wound open and let the pus out, it's very unlikely that the wound is going to heal. So there is a need to seriously engage in robust debates, and centers of education like Oxford, like UCT, WITS, are important platforms where you can create forums for intelligent and for robust debates and engagement, you know, to actually discuss how we deal with these issues. And it will help even generations to come to know how they deal with these issues. I think it is wrong. And I'll give you another example of situation in a school, a previously white school, because as you know, in apartheid, we used to have that situation of white and black schools. When the schools merged, when the school opened up for black people, the symbols on the schools had not changed. And when there was an opportunity at the school to have a statue of a child in the school, you know, the school had decided it was going to be a white boy, and the parents had to protest. And I was like, how do we allow people to get to a stage where they have to protest about, you know, issues like this when we had decided that there was going to be transformation? The minute you decide there is democracy, there's going to be transformation, then you should, as either institutions of learning or government be forward-looking and create policies that will ensure that you don't end up with people protesting and forcing you into a situation where you have to bring statues down. The issue of the roads must fall at UCT, fortunately, the council, that was before my time, the council came to a conclusion that the statue had to be removed. And I believe that at Oxford, there is also discussions and a likelihood that the statue of Cecil Rhodes will be removed, from your campus. But I'm very hopeful because I see how there's been a forum that's been created at Oxford to actually engage in how issues like this should be dealt with. And I was really moved by Valerie Amos, who is at Oxford. I watched her interview on CNN, where she also mentioned that perhaps the statues and symbols like this should be placed in museums, there should be active discussions and debates on how they should be handled in future. It is important to actually address our past. We can't run away from it.
Definitely. Question here from Sandyha, studying accounting and finance at LSE. Thank you so much for the talk and your inspiring work. What advice would you give to students who are looking to have a big social impact themselves?
Oh my goodness. Thank you very much for that question. I'm really encouraged, also by our students that we fund who are still at university, who go into the community. They offer afternoon classes to matriculants, help them with, their work. They go into the community, helping with daycare centers. Some have developed, we have a group of amazing social entrepreneurs who, find local solutions to local problems. Some of these kids have, there's one who has developed, who distributes medicine for old people using his bicycle, and he's just developed a group of young people who also serve as distributors of medical drugs and for old people in the community. So I think there is so much that students, whilst can do in terms of starting their philanthropic work, and you don't need to start with a lot of money. It's about giving your time and doing things that you're really passionate about. I'm very passionate about education. I'm passionate about women empowerment because I see it as a center of development within families, within the community, and in society. I'm passionate, about the work that we do in the fashion. So you need to follow your own passion. You don't need to start with a lot of money.
Absolutely. Shifting towards a fashion question again, Sami, who studies history at Warwick, asks, what are the most important lessons you've learned about the fashion industry that you'd give to aspiring young designers?
That it's a very tough industry. It is a very challenging industry. We at AFI, we have a development platform for young fashion designers. We find these young people at fashion colleges, and we develop them over a year where we help them with the insights of the business of fashion, because they come from college having learned about the art and how to cut material and how to put together a collection, but they are not exposed to the marketing, the PR, and sales and retail. And we normally help them with that. So I think once you understand your trade, as in how to put collections together and how to make clothes, it is important that you realize that you're selling products, and you need to be able to talk about your products, that is, market them to others, and you need to understand trends and ensure that your products is sellable and it is globally relevant. But having said that, I think where we live, we're living now in an era where climate change has become such an important issue. I always say to young people that they need to also be aware of issues of sustainability, how we produce clothing, how we push consumers to, over consume clothing and fashion, which then ends up in dumps. So we need to be mindful about, issues of sustainability in the industry, in production and consumption of fashion.
And then going back to a geopolitics question, George, who studies HSPS at Cambridge, asks, do you think that the Chinese involvement with African nations will be a positive or a negative for African development?
Well, I think that Africa, like all other countries, has to build, relationships with other countries. We have to build relationships with Europe, with America, with China, with India, with South America. We have to be part of the global community. Currently, China is obviously the biggest purchaser of our raw materials in terms of minerals. But there's also been discussions around, beneficiation and ensuring that not only are they taking the raw material out of Africa, but that we can then beneficiate and sell them finished products. So I think it is important for us to have these relationships for our own development.
And going back to the crisis that we currently face, Tom, who's reading history at UCL, asks, do you think that this crisis has shown the importance of governments working with charities and a multi-stakeholder approach, or has it made it clear that looking after people is primarily the duty of just the public sector?
I think that's a very, very important a question that you're raising. And that's what we've noticed now, as I said, as we're dealing with COVID-19 in South Africa. The partnership between the private sector, the public sector, as well as donors like philanthropists, is critically important. Philanthropists are able to go into areas where government cannot, and where the private sector might not be interested to, because it doesn't make commercial sense for them to do so. Philanthropy also is able to experiment, in a small scale before, projects can then be taken to scale, because of, the flexibility, and also because philanthropy has patient capital. But the other important role that we're seeing of philanthropy on the continent, as I said in the beginning, the African continent is a very giving continent. People on the continent have always been giving. So philanthropy is not really a new concept on the continent. It's just that it's been called something else. It's been called Ubuntu, because we realize that we are so connected. So the role that philanthropy can play now that there's been a rise of the middle class on the continent, and we've seen more people accumulating wealth, and we're seeing more people wanting to give more, then philanthropists can create an ecosystem that enables other philanthropists to actually participate. We're able to share best practices, we're able to share knowledge, we're able to collaborate as philanthropists, and we can also collaborate with government and the private sector. And a very good example of that collaboration, as I said, is how we've come together to deal with issues of Ebola, and how we now coming together, private sector, contributing knowledge and systems and governance systems, and working with us as funders to ensure that we can procure PPEs for the public hospitals. And what's been interesting in this equation, and I'm talking specifically to the procurement of PPEs, is that because we're dealing with big budgets here of procurement, we've also been able to see how small businesses, as well as women-owned businesses, have been sidelined by a system where the big players have monopolized spaces, in terms of whether it's making hospital gowns or providing masks for hospital workers. And it's been an opportunity for us, again, working with government to build our capacity to manufacture locally. As we speak, the foundation has been in touch with a few manufacturers, particularly those that have a majority women in the companies, as well as the previously disadvantaged companies, using our BEE policy, that the Black Economic Empowerment policy, to ensure that they can also be part of the procurement process and get into the tender system and win the bids to provide hospital gowns and other PPEs for public hospitals. So not only has there been a commitment by the foundation, to COVID relief, but we've used that opportunity also to support businesses that have not been, firstly, are suffering because of the lockdown, but also have not been part of the big, players in the procurement space. So it's been a learning exercise for us.
Sam, reading history at King's College London, asks, you mentioned Nelson Mandela as an inspirational figure for you. Are there any other figures who you look to for inspiration, particularly at these difficult times?
That's an interesting one. I must tell you that, I think I've been thinking a lot about my parents lately. They're both late, unfortunately, and just being very, very thankful for what they sacrificed, to get me where I am. I look up to them a lot. They've always been my inspiration. I have a husband who's very, very supportive. We work together in the foundation, and our 3 sons, and they are also very keen on philanthropy. And I work with fantastic people at the University of Cape Town. Our Vice Chancellor, Professor Mamokgethi, is a very dynamic young woman. We have also formed a community of chancellors that I work with. So there's so many people intelligent, very smart, hardworking, inspiring people that we work with. But I think most importantly also, I'm inspired by people who give when they actually don't even have much to give. When it comes to the Solidarity Fund, it was opened up to the public to make donations so that government could procure PPEs. And some of the funds came from people who really, really, have very little to give. And that's truly amazing, yeah, so there's so much to be grateful for all of us.
Aliyah, reading economics at UCL, asks, what achievement are you most proud of in your career?
That's a tough one. I don't think I can. Oh my goodness, that's a very tough one. I can't say maybe most proud of, but I've enjoyed working as a doctor. I'm very passionate. I loved it, absolutely. Even now during the COVID times, I find when people talk about oh, we're using dexamethasone for that. And I'm like, no, I know we used to use it for babies who can't breathe, you know, so I'm still the doctor in me. But the work of the foundation for me and being able to give others an opportunity that I have been given also as, you know, when I was a young girl, for me is, I think it really gets me out of bed in the morning. It's really exciting what we can do to help the continent, Africa, you know, towards its developmental path, its social and economic development, particularly for young people. That's critical, that's crucial.
Danny, studying chemistry at Imperial, asks, there's a big tendency in Europe to see Africa as some kind of monolithic bloc. How important do you think it is that African nations express their many individual differences?
That's an interesting one. Very, very interesting. I mean, we always, I think, on public platforms talk about Africa is not one block. You know, we have many countries, 54 on the continent, different nations. In South Africa, we speak, you know, we've got 11, we've got 9 provinces, 11 different languages. We are so different, you know, so we're definitely not just one block. And I think it is important, you know, in our communication, in the media, universities have a very important role to play. And the more we see people of, you know, from different countries represented at places like Oxford, then, you know, at places like UCT, at Wits University, you know, then the more people will realize that, oh, actually, you know, if I'm from Joburg in South Africa, I might not know somebody who is in Nigeria, you know, because that's the common question that you normally get asked when people don't actually understand how vast the continent is. You know, a continent of close to 1 billion people. So I think it's important in how we communicate, you know, representation in the media, in our institutions. And thank you for also, you know, to the Oxford Guild and the sponsors for, you know, engaging in, you know, diversity, inviting people from different backgrounds to come and speak at Oxford. I think that is great.
Thank you very much. We've got a question here from Eleanor, who's studying public policy as a master's at UCL. As a woman who's reached great success as an entrepreneur, what advice would you give to other women looking to make it in the business world?
Wow, thank you very much. I think that women actually do not fully understand that they are really powerful in their own right, that they have so much to offer, you know, in terms of a different perspective, in terms of different thinking. You know, there's so much value that women bring to any platform, and we should be very confident about that. I think it is important, whether you're a man or a woman, to never stop learning. I'm a perpetual learner. I really enjoy, you know, that's why I've gone into so many sectors, from medicine to fashion, because I really enjoy learning and engaging with people and, you know, seeing what, you know, what more I can do. I think any woman wanting to make it in the business world needs to get the skills, get the right skills, you know, really be confident about yourself and what you want to do, and go for it.
Moving on to a different topic, we've got a question here from Kwame, studying accounting and finance at LSE. Do you have any reading recommendations for us? We all have a lot more time right now, so it would really be appreciated.
Well, I'd love to hear what you're reading. That's right. It's we have had so much time. I don't, I have just been reading Ray Dalio's Principles. I really enjoyed reading that. Ray Dalio was at the Milken Conference in Abu Dhabi as well, and reading his book was quite interesting. I've just been reading about Lee Kuan Yew. I've had his book and never had time to actually go through it. It's fascinating. He was also an amazing leader. I've also been learning about e-commerce because with the fashion business, the AFI decided 2 years ago that we were going to go digital. And e-commerce is an area that we have been looking at seriously and have had started then to go into e-commerce. So I had been reading a lot about Reid Hoffman's books and platform businesses, and I'd love to know what you are reading as well. But yes, reading is a luxury. Yeah.
Definitely, and Principles was a great read. It was fantastic to meet Ray at the Milken Conference.
Absolutely.
So we've got a question here from Nina, who's a fashion designer in South Africa, who's asking, I'm trying to find international markets to expand my brand. How do I know I'm ready and when there are limited markets in my own country?
That's a very important question. I think, Nina, before you try and sell outside of South Africa, you've got to make sure that you have really perfected your offering and your business model in South Africa. You have tested it within the country. The type of customer that you serve. You stick to whatever your DNA, whatever your offering is, and it's clear to people, and you understand price points. So you're currently with lockdown, e-commerce has become very, very attractive. So then you're going to have to understand logistics, different currencies, and you will have to understand, fulfillment of products that you will have to then sell on e-commerce on an international platform. But I think you learn as you go, and it is important that you have a partner who is business savvy, and you really understand your customers.
Eve, reading Modern Languages at Warwick, asks, what made you want to dedicate yourself to philanthropy?
Wow, gee, that's a very difficult question. I think being a recipient of other people's giving, like I said, that my parents, my community, teachers, people around me had contributed towards my education, so I think when I completed my studies, I thought, my goodness, if my education could get me this far, can you imagine how many other young girls could achieve if only they had access to what I have had access to. And I was very lucky that my husband was also of the same mind, that we both decided we're going to join the Giving Pledge. There was no argument about it. There was no, we decided this is what we're going to do. We're going to commit ourselves to giving. And I guess also maybe, our Christian background also played a role in our decision.
We've got a question here from Jakob, who's studying maths at UCL. He asks, what are the best ways of fighting against subtle forms of racism, such as microaggressions, in a place of education? We need to be introspective. What do you advise?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. You're in a place of education. racism sometimes, manifests itself in subtle ways, as you say, and at times it's almost unconscious. I think you may need to speak to the person that is, showing you the aggression, educate them as to, what they do doesn't go down well with you. You're not happy about that. And, if that doesn't work, I guess there should be structures at the university to elevate, such instances of racism. And I'm sure that could be dealt with within the right forum. But at times, just educating a person about, what they're doing, that it's actually, without being aggressive yourself, might just open their minds, their eyes to how what they're doing is affecting you. Yeah, I think then, of course, using the structures that are available to you at the university.
We've got a question here from Isabel, who's reading law at King's College London. You've had a really amazing career helping to elevate so many women. Looking onwards, what are the next projects that you'd like to work on?
Well, within the foundation, we created what we call the Center for Gender Equality and Leadership. So I'm really keen to work on projects around developing leadership, especially amongst young people. I don't have any daughters. It is so funny. So whenever we have young girls from high school, I totally get really excited about it. We recently took young girls to a seminar in Canada, which was led by an organization called Women Work or something like that. So and having these young people and actually seeing how confident they are when you put them on platforms to speak really, really inspires me. So the work of developing leadership in young people, I'm finding that very, very exciting. And then, of course, there is the big work that we still have to do, that we're working on currently, which is ensuring that our policies, and particularly procurement policies, government policies, also take women-owned businesses into account. So that is the big one that we're currently engaging with government on, ensuring that we help with the right policy framework. But education is still my biggest passion.
We have a question here from Nora, who's reading PPE at Oxford. Thank you so much for being such an inspiration. As a role model to so many of us, I would love to know who were some of your role models or inspirations when growing up?
Oh, well, as I said, my parents, really, my mom and dad, very humble people, very principled, hardworking, and taught us the value of education, the value of looking out for each other. I'm one of 5 children. Sorry, my laptop is about to go out of power. I wanted to connect, but I'm fine. And then there's been doctors in my community. That's why I studied medicine. My mother was a nurse, but there were doctors that I really looked up to, in our community. The women in my community, women like Mrs. Tambo, were very inspiring, hardworking in difficult times, and I really looked up to them. Tough women like Winnie Mandela as well, who had gone through so much challenges in her life, and kept the anti-apartheid movement going in South Africa when Mandela was in prison, were also inspiring. Women like Sirleaf Johnson, a former president of Liberia, totally amazing women that we all look up to. And, you know, so, and globally, we interact obviously with other women, you know, from different countries that really do amazing work in their own right. So, yeah, I think there's many people that we come into contact with.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Precious, for sharing your time and insights with us and what's been a really interesting session. It's been a real pleasure to have you join us. And thank you also to everyone watching for your many and challenging questions. We look forward to welcoming you again all soon at our upcoming events. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I really look forward to future collaborations with Oxford, where we can you know, ensure that we have more students coming over, or we collaborate on, you know, research or with our universities in the Global South. And thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Yeah. God bless you too.